March 17th, 1943. The North Atlantic stretched endlessly in all directions, its grey waters concealing death beneath every wave. Captain Robert Henderson gripped the bridge rail of the Liberty ship SS Thomas Jefferson as another merchant vessel erupted in flames 3 miles to starboard. The explosion illuminated the faces of his crew, their eyes reflecting the terrible mathematics of survival that had consumed the Atlantic for nearly 4 years. Henderson had watched 17 ships die in the past 6 months, 17 crews swallowed by the cold darkness, their cargoes of steel and grain settling into the ocean's depths. The German U-boat commanders called it the happy time, their wolf packs cutting through Allied convoys like scythes through wheat. But what those submarine aces didn't know, what Kapitan Heinrich Bleichrodt and his fellow hunters couldn't have imagined, was that the prey was about to become the predator. The transformation wouldn't happen overnight. It wouldn't come through a single brilliant innovation or one decisive battle. Instead, it would emerge from the minds of men who refused to accept defeat, who turned the vast Atlantic into a chessboard where every move carried the weight of nations. This is the story of how American ingenuity, British determination, and Allied cooperation rewrote the rules of naval warfare, transforming helpless merchant convoys into deadly traps for the most feared submarine force in history. The numbers in March 1943 told a story of impending disaster. German U-boats were sinking Allied merchant ships faster than shipyards could replace them. In the previous month alone, 108 vessels had vanished beneath the Atlantic waves, taking with them 627,000 tons of desperately needed supplies. At this rate of loss, Britain would starve before Christmas. The Soviet Union, dependent on American Lend-Lease materials, would collapse within months. The entire Allied war effort hung by a thread stretched across 3,000 miles of hostile ocean. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the German submarine fleet, had crafted a strategy of devastating simplicity. His wolf packs would gather intelligence from long-range reconnaissance, coordinate their attacks through encrypted radio communications, and strike in coordinated waves that overwhelmed convoy defences. A single convoy might face attacks from 8 or 10 U-boats simultaneously, their torpedoes creating walls of destruction that no merchant ship could escape. The typical Allied convoy of early 1943 presented an almost pathetic sight to the German submarine commanders watching through their periscopes. 40 or 50 merchant vessels arranged in neat columns, their speeds limited to that of the slowest ship, usually around 8 knots. These floating targets were protected by perhaps 6 escort vessels, destroyers and corvettes spread thin across miles of ocean, their sonar equipment primitive, and their crews exhausted from months of continuous operations. Commander Klaus Bargsten, veteran U-boat ace with 23 confirmed kills, described the early convoy attacks in his post-war memoir. The merchant ships moved like cattle in a field, predictable and helpless. Our wolfpack tactics allowed us to position submarines ahead of the convoy, behind it, and on both flanks. When we attacked, there was nowhere for them to run. The escorts would race toward one attack, leaving entire sections of the convoy undefended. We could sink 4 or 5 ships in a single night, sometimes more. But beneath the surface of these apparent German victories, Allied naval intelligence was conducting the most sophisticated analysis in maritime history. Teams of mathematicians, former merchant mariners, and naval officers pored over every attack report, every survivor account, every intercepted German radio transmission. They mapped U-boat patrol patterns, analysed torpedo attack angles, and calculated the optimal spacing for convoy formations. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Professor Patrick Blackett, a physicist who had won the Nobel Prize for his work on cosmic rays, applied mathematical modelling to convoy defence. His operational research team discovered that the Germans were exploiting fundamental weaknesses in Allied tactics that had nothing to do with courage or seamanship, and everything to do with geometry and probability. Blackett's analysis revealed a startling truth. The number of ships lost in a convoy attack wasn't proportional to the total number of ships in the convoy. Instead, losses correlated with the perimeter of the formation. A convoy of 40 ships arranged in 8 columns of 5 had the same defensive perimeter as a convoy of 32 ships in the same formation. This meant larger convoys were actually safer per ship than smaller ones, contradicting decades of naval thinking. The mathematics were elegant and deadly. German U-boats attacked from the periphery of convoys, picking off ships on the edges of formations. By reducing the perimeter-to-ship ratio, Allied planners could dramatically reduce losses without adding a single escort vessel. The revelation would transform convoy operations within months. Meanwhile, in the laboratories and workshops of Britain and America, scientists and engineers were developing technologies that would revolutionize anti-submarine warfare. High-frequency direction finding, known as HUF-DUF, allowed ships to pinpoint German radio transmissions with unprecedented accuracy. Improved radar systems could detect surfaced U-boats at distances that made coordinated wolfpack attacks nearly impossible. The most revolutionary development emerged from the telecommunications research establishment in Britain. Centimetric radar, operating on wavelengths of just 10 centimeters, could detect submarine periscopes and even the small wake they created. German U-boat commanders, accustomed to approaching convoys on the surface under cover of darkness, suddenly found themselves illuminated by invisible beams that betrayed their positions to alert escort commanders. Captain Johnny Walker of the Royal Navy became the master of these new technologies. His second escort group had developed tactics that turned the hunter-hunted relationship on its head. Instead of merely defending convoys, Walker's ships actively hunted German submarines, using coordinated search patterns and improved sonar to track U-boats through the depths. Walker's innovation lay in understanding that anti-submarine warfare was fundamentally about persistence and coordination. German U-boats could dive to escape immediate attack, but they had limited battery power and air supplies. By maintaining contact and coordinating attacks from multiple directions, escort groups could force submarines to remain submerged until their batteries died or their crews suffocated. The new tactics required unprecedented levels of training and communication. Escort commanders practiced night attacks until they could coordinate multiple ships in total darkness. Radio operators learned to maintain contact while preserving radio silence. Sonar operators developed the ability to distinguish between submarine contacts and schools of fish, underwater wrecks, and thermal layers. American shipyards were simultaneously revolutionizing merchant ship construction. The Liberty Ship program, initially criticized for producing vessels too slowly, had evolved into the most efficient shipbuilding operation in history. Henry Kaiser's yards were launching new vessels faster than German submarines could sink existing ones, fundamentally altering the mathematics of the Battle of the Atlantic. But technology and production alone wouldn't defeat the U-boat threat. The real transformation required changing the minds of merchant mariners who had spent years as helpless victims. Convoy commodores began receiving intelligence briefings that revealed German tactics and weaknesses. Ship captains learned evasive maneuvers that could break up coordinated torpedo attacks. Even ordinary seamen were trained in damage control techniques that could keep torpedoed vessels afloat long enough for rescue. The psychological impact of these changes rippled through both fleets. German submarine commanders, accustomed to easy victories against helpless merchants, found themselves facing escorts that seemed to anticipate their every move. Convoys that should have been slaughtered arrived intact. U-boats that had operated with impunity for years began disappearing without trace. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the fate of the Atlantic War. In the coming months, the most experienced U-boat aces would face convoy escort groups equipped with revolutionary technology and tactics. The hunters were about to discover that their prey had developed claws. The first indication that something fundamental had changed came on April 28, 1943, when convoy ONS-5 departed Liverpool bound for Halifax. To German observers monitoring Allied radio traffic, it appeared to be another standard formation. 43 merchant vessels, arranged in 11 columns, escorted by Commander Peter Gretton's B-7 escort group. The convoy's slow speed of 7 knots and predictable route through the Greenland Gap made it an ideal target for Wolfpack operations. What the Germans couldn't detect was the invisible revolution sailing with those merchant ships. Hidden beneath the familiar silhouettes of destroyers and corvettes lay technologies that would have seemed like science fiction just 2 years earlier. HMS Duncan carried the latest Type 271 radar system, its rotating antenna capable of painting detailed pictures of the ocean surface in complete darkness. The escort ships maintained constant communication through encrypted voice radio, their operators trained to coordinate complex maneuvers without betraying their positions to enemy listeners. More importantly, the convoy carried something no German intelligence analyst had anticipated. Every escort commander possessed detailed knowledge of U-boat tactics, gleaned from months of operational analysis. They knew that Wolfpacks preferred to attack from ahead and on the flanks. They understood that German submarines needed to surface to recharge batteries and communicate with headquarters. Most critically, they had learned that aggressive counterattacks could disrupt entire Wolfpack operations. Captain Herbert Schneider, commanding U-boat 632, was the first to make contact with convoy ONS-5 on the morning of April 29th. His encrypted radio transmission to Admiral Donitz's headquarters contained the standard intelligence. Convoy bearing north-northwest, speed 7 knots, approximately 40 vessels with standard escort. Weather conditions favourable for night surface attacks. AM maintaining contact and requesting Wolfpack coordination. Within hours, 13 additional U-boats were converging on the convoy's projected course. The submarines represented some of Germany's most experienced commanders, veterans who had collectively sunk over 300 Allied vessels. Captain Otto von Bülow in U-404 had personally destroyed 26 ships. Korvettenkapitän Heinrich Hasenschar, commanding U-628, was credited with 31 kills. These men had perfected the art of convoy destruction through years of successful operations. The German attack plan followed established doctrine with mathematical precision. The Wolfpack would position submarines in a patrol line across the convoy's route, then shadow the formation until darkness provided cover for coordinated surface attacks. Multiple U-boats would strike simultaneously from different directions, overwhelming the escort's ability to respond effectively. The merchant ships, limited to their convoy speed and unable to maneuver independently, would present stationary targets for experienced torpedo crews. But as the German submarines moved into position, they encountered something unprecedented. The escort ships weren't behaving according to established patterns. Instead of maintaining fixed positions around the convoy, they were conducting aggressive sweeps far beyond traditional screening distances. HMS Vedette, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Raymond Hart, detected U-630 at a range of 12 miles and immediately launched a coordinated attack with 2 other escorts. The German submarine commander found himself facing a level of persistence and coordination that defied his experience. Rather than making a single attack run and withdrawing, the British escorts maintained contact for over 4 hours. They used improved ASDIC sonar to track the submarine through multiple diving attempts, forcing it to remain submerged until its batteries approached exhaustion. When U-630 finally surfaced to escape, it faced immediate attack from aircraft that had been vectored to the precise location by ship-based radar. This pattern repeated across the entire Wolfpack operation. German submarines that had operated with virtual impunity found themselves detected, tracked, and attacked by escorts that seemed to possess supernatural awareness of their movements. The new centimetric radar revealed surfaced U-boats at distances that made coordinated attacks nearly impossible. High-frequency direction, finding equipment pinpointed German radio transmissions, allowing escort commanders to position their ships for maximum effectiveness. Commander Gretton's tactical innovations proved equally devastating to German operations. Instead of simply defending the convoy, he divided his escorts into hunter-killer groups that actively pursued submarine contacts. When sonar operators detected a U-boat, multiple ships would converge on the contact using coordinated depth charge patterns that created overlapping fields of destruction. The German submarines found themselves trapped between attacking escorts, unable to escape to safe depths. The psychological impact on German crews was immediate and profound. Oberleutnant Hans-Joachim Schwantke, commanding U-43, recorded in his war diary the disorientation of facing escorts that anticipated his every tactical move. The enemy destroyers respond to our maneuvers before we complete them. Their sonar maintains contact through evasive diving. Their depth charges create patterns of destruction that leave no escape route. This is not the same enemy we faced in 1942. The transformation wasn't limited to escort tactics. Merchant ship crews had received extensive training in convoy discipline and damage control procedures. When U-boats did achieve torpedo hits, the targeted vessels often remained afloat through superior damage control. Crews that had once abandoned ship at the first sign of flooding now fought desperately to save their vessels, often successfully. The German submarines found that even successful attacks rarely achieved the catastrophic results they'd come to expect. Captain Samuel Eliot Morrison, the official US Navy historian who sailed with several convoys, documented the change in merchant marine morale. The seamen no longer saw themselves as helpless victims waiting for inevitable destruction. They understood their role in a coordinated defense system that gave them genuine protection. Ships that might have scattered under attack maintained formation discipline, denying German submarines the chaos they needed for successful Wolfpack operations. The technological advantages extended beyond individual ship capabilities to encompass entire convoy operations. Improved weather routing allowed convoy commodores to avoid areas of predicted U-boat concentration. Enhanced radio intelligence provided advance warning of German Wolfpack formations. Most significantly, the growing availability of very long-range aircraft meant that convoys could receive air cover throughout increasingly large portions of their Atlantic crossings. The Battle of Convoy, ONS-5, reached its climax during the night of May 5th when 15 German submarines launched coordinated attacks against what they believed were helpless merchant vessels. Instead, they encountered a convoy defense system that had been transformed by months of tactical innovation and technological advancement. The escort ships, operating with precision that amazed even their own commanders, intercepted and destroyed attack after attack. By dawn on May 6th, the mathematical equation of Atlantic warfare had been permanently altered. The German Wolfpack that had gathered to destroy convoy ONS-5 had lost 6 submarines, while sinking only 13 merchant vessels. More importantly, the psychological dominance that had sustained German submarine operations for nearly 4 years had been shattered. U-boat commanders who survived the battle returned to base with reports that contradicted everything Admiral Dönitz believed about Allied capabilities. The implications extended far beyond a single convoy battle. German submarine crews, once confident in their tactical superiority, now faced the prospect of hunting prey that had evolved into predators. The technological and tactical innovations that had saved convoy ONS-5 were being rapidly distributed throughout the Allied fleet. Every subsequent convoy would benefit from the hard-won lessons of that May engagement. Within weeks, the transformation would accelerate beyond German comprehension, turning the Atlantic from a German hunting ground into an Allied trap that would consume the most experienced submarine crews in maritime history. The revolution that began with convoy ONS-5 spread through the Allied fleet with the speed of wildfire. Admiral Max Horton, commander of Western Approaches Command, recognized that a fundamental shift had occurred in the Atlantic War. The carefully documented tactics that had saved the convoy weren't kept secret in some classified vault. Instead, they were immediately distributed to every escort group, every convoy commodore, and every merchant marine training facility across the Allied world. The speed of this tactical transformation defied German intelligence assessments. Within 3 weeks of the ONS-5 battle, escort commanders from Iceland to Gibraltar were implementing coordinated hunter-killer tactics. The Royal Navy's tactical school at Tobermory began training courses that turned individual ship commanders into components of a unified defensive system. American destroyer crews arriving in British waters found themselves drilling night and day in maneuvers that had been theoretical concepts just months earlier. But the most devastating blow to German submarine operations came from an unexpected source. The Allied codebreakers at Bletchley Park had achieved something that seemed impossible. They had penetrated the German Enigma naval cipher with such completeness that Admiral Dönitz's most secret communications were being read in London before his own submarine commanders received them. Every Wolfpack formation order, every tactical directive, every change in patrol patterns was known to Allied convoy routers within hours of transmission. The implications staggered even the most optimistic Allied planners. Convoys could be routed around known U-boat concentrations. Escort reinforcements could be positioned exactly where German attacks were planned. Most devastatingly, Allied hunter-killer groups could be dispatched to intercept German submarines while they were still approaching their patrol areas. The hunters had become the hunted without even realizing the transformation was occurring. Captain Heinrich Bleichrodt, the same U-boat ace who had terrorized Atlantic shipping for 3 years, found himself facing this new reality in late May 1943. His U-109 was approaching what should have been an easy interception of a westbound convoy when his hydrophone operator reported propeller sounds from multiple directions. Before Bleichrodt could react, his submarine was surrounded by 4 Allied destroyers that had been waiting in ambush for over 6 hours. The psychological impact of such encounters rippled through the German submarine fleet with devastating effect. Experienced commanders who had developed their tactics through years of successful operations suddenly found themselves outmaneuvered by enemies who seemed to anticipate their every decision. The confident aggression that had characterized German submarine operations gave way to cautious uncertainty that undermined the effectiveness of even successful attacks. The technological advantages continued multiplying with each passing week. American factories were producing improved radar sets faster than German intelligence could catalogue their capabilities. British laboratories were developing sonar systems that could track submarines through previously impossible acoustic conditions. Most significantly, the massive industrial capacity of North America was being focused on anti-submarine warfare, with results that defied German comprehension. The escort carrier program represented perhaps the most revolutionary development in convoy protection. These small aircraft carriers, converted from merchant ship hulls, could provide air cover throughout the entire Atlantic crossing. The sight of Allied aircraft operating hundreds of miles from land shattered German assumptions about the operational limitations of carrier-based aviation. U-boat commanders who had counted on surface attacks during daylight hours found themselves under constant aerial surveillance. Lieutenant Commander John Kilbracken, flying Grumman Wildcat fighters from the escort carrier HMS Biter, described the transformation from the pilot's perspective. 6 months ago, German submarines operated on the surface with complete impunity during daylight hours. They could recharge batteries, communicate with headquarters, and position themselves for attacks without fear of interference. Now they immediately dive upon sighting aircraft, disrupting their operational entire cycle. The psychological pressure of constant surveillance is breaking down their tactical coherence. The mathematical precision of Allied convoy routing had evolved into an art form that combined weather prediction, intelligence analysis, and operational research. Teams of analysts could calculate the optimal course changes that would minimize exposure to known U-boat patrol lines, while maintaining acceptable arrival schedules. Convoys that had once followed predictable Great Circle routes now pursued courses random that seemed to German observers but represented sophisticated mathematical optimization. The German response to these developments revealed the fundamental weakness in their entire submarine strategy. Admiral Dönitz had built his Wolfpack tactics around the assumption that Allied convoys would remain essentially helpless targets, protected by inadequate escorts. When that assumption proved false, the entire German operational framework collapsed. Attempts to modify U-boat tactics met with limited success because the underlying technological and intelligence advantages now favoured the Allies so decisively. Korvettenkapitän Otto Kretschmer, Germany's most successful with submarine ace 44 confirmed kills, was captured in March 1941 before these revolutionary changes took effect. His post-war analysis of submarine operations proved German remarkably prescient. The Wolfpack system succeeded only as long as the Allies remained tactically and technologically inferior. Once they achieved parity in detection capabilities and superior coordination in response tactics, our entire operational concept became obsolete. We continued using 1940 methods against 1943 technology and coordination. The human cost of this transformation fell heaviest on the German submarine crews, who had dominated Atlantic shipping for nearly 4 years. These men, many of them barely out of their teens, had joined the U-boat service during the period of easy victories and devastating convoy attacks. They had never experienced sustained defensive actions by competent, well-equipped opponents. The psychological adjustment to facing escorts that could detect, track, and destroy their submarines proved more difficult than adapting to new enemy technology. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Luth, commanding U-181, recorded in his war diary the growing demoralization among German submarine crews. The men who volunteered for U-boat duty expected to engage in successful hunting operations against helpless merchant vessels. They find instead that every patrol becomes opponents who seem to possess a desperate struggle for survival against unlimited technological advantages. Morale collapses when hunters discover they have become prey. The Allied merchant marine experienced the opposite psychological transformation. Crews that had sailed in constant terror of submarine attack began to develop confidence in their escort protection. The knowledge that their convoys possessed genuine defensive capabilities changed fundamental attitudes toward Atlantic crossings. Merchant seamen, who had once viewed each voyage as a probable death sentence, now understood they were components of an integrated system designed for mutual protection. Captain Arthur Moore, master of the Liberty ship SS Jeremiah O'Brien, document changed this in merchant marine attitudes. The escorts no longer simply accompany our convoys, they actively hunt the submarines that threaten us. We witness destroyer attacks that drive German U-boats deep beneath the surface, sometimes for hours at a time. The knowledge that our defenders possess superior technology and tactics transforms the entire experience of Atlantic crossings. The cascade of German submarine losses accelerated throughout June and July 1943. Experienced U-boat commanders who had survived dozens of successful patrols found themselves facing technological and tactical challenges that exceeded their training and experience. The casualty rates among German submarine crews approached levels that made continued operations unsustainable. Young men who had volunteered for submarine duty, expecting to become naval heroes, discovered instead that they were joining what amounted to suicide missions. The statistical transformation told the story with mathematical precision. German submarines that had sunk Allied merchant vessels at a rate of nearly 4 ships per U-boat per patrol in early 1942 were achieving less than 1 kill per patrol by summer 1943. Simultaneously, German submarine losses had increased from an average of 6 boats per month in 1942 to over 30 per month by July 1943. The mathematical equation that governed Atlantic warfare had been permanently reversed. Admiral Dönitz's response to these devastating losses revealed the intellectual bankruptcy of German naval strategy. Rather than acknowledging that fundamental technological and tactical changes had made Wolfpack operations obsolete, he ordered intensified attacks that only accelerated German losses. U-boat crews were commanded to press home attacks against convoys that possessed overwhelming defensive advantages. The result was a massacre that consumed Germany's most experienced submarine personnel. The final transformation occurred not in the technology of anti-submarine warfare, but in the strategic thinking that governed Allied convoy operations. Admiral Horton and his American counterparts recognized that convoy protection had evolved beyond mere defense into active offensive operations. Escort groups were no longer simply protecting merchant vessels. They were systematically destroying the German submarine fleet through superior coordination, technology, and tactics. The implications extended far beyond the Battle of the Atlantic. German submarine crews represented some of the most highly trained and experienced personnel in the entire Wehrmacht. Their systematic destruction removed irreplaceable expertise that had taken years to develop. The industrial resources devoted to U-boat construction were being consumed faster than German shipyards could replace them. Most significantly, the failure of submarine operations meant that Britain would survive, the Soviet Union would continue receiving American supplies, and the Allied invasion of Europe would proceed with adequate logistical support. The mathematical certainty of Allied victory in the Atlantic War became apparent to German naval intelligence by August 1943. Their own analysis showed that U-boat losses exceeded replacement rates by factors that made long-term operations impossible. The submarine crews that had once terrorized Allied shipping were being systematically eliminated by opponents who had evolved from helpless victims into efficient killers. The hunters had indeed become the hunted, and the transformation was irreversible. By September 1943, the revolution was complete. What had begun as desperate defensive measures had evolved into the most sophisticated anti-submarine warfare system in naval history. The Allied convoys that crossed the Atlantic now did so under protection that made successful U-boat attacks nearly impossible. The German submarine force that had brought Britain to the brink of starvation was being destroyed faster than Admiral Dönitz could train replacement crews. The final phase of this transformation began with something the Germans never expected: the hunted turning on their hunters with systematic precision. By October 1943, Allied escort groups weren't simply defending convoys anymore. They were conducting what amounted to search and destroy missions across vast stretches of the Atlantic, using intelligence so precise it seemed supernatural to German submarine commanders who found themselves under attack in positions they believed were secret. Captain Frederick Walker's second escort group had become the embodiment of this new aggressive philosophy. His ships prowled the Atlantic like wolves themselves, seeking out German submarines with relentless determination. Walker had developed what he called the creeping attack, a methodical approach that used multiple ships to maintain sonar contact while systematically destroying submarines through coordinated depth charge patterns. The technique was devastating in its efficiency and terrifying in its persistence. The psychological impact on German submarine crews was immediate and profound. Oberleutnant Hans Treuer, commanding U-221, recorded in his war diary an encounter that exemplified the new reality. "We detected the convoy at dawn, positioned ourselves for the standard approach, and began our attack run. Within minutes, 3 destroyers appeared from different directions, moving with coordination that seemed impossible. They maintained contact through every evasive maneuver, every emergency dive, every attempt to break away. After 8 hours of continuous pursuit, we were forced to surface with dead batteries. The enemy was waiting. This relentless pursuit represented more than tactical innovation. It reflected a fundamental shift in Allied thinking about submarine warfare. The defensive mindset that had characterized early convoy operations gave way to offensive aggression that treated every U-boat contact as an opportunity for destruction rather than merely disruption. Escort commanders, who had once been satisfied with driving submarines away from their charges, now pursued contacts until they achieved kills or complete battery exhaustion. The technological advantages that enabled this transformation continued expanding with each passing month. Very long-range Liberator aircraft, equipped with the latest radar and armed with improved depth charges, could now patrol areas of the Atlantic that had been beyond Allied air coverage for the entire war. German submarine commanders, who had counted on the mid-Atlantic air gap for safe surface operations, found themselves under constant aerial surveillance throughout their patrols. Squadron leader John Bullock, flying anti-submarine patrols from Iceland, described the impact of extended air coverage. German U-boats had developed their entire operational doctrine around periods of surface running for battery charging and communication. Our aircraft now maintain coverage throughout most of their patrol areas. They can no longer surface with impunity, which means they cannot maintain the operational tempo necessary for effective wolfpack coordination. We are literally suffocating their operational capability. The intelligence war had evolved into something approaching science fiction in its sophistication. Allied codebreakers weren't simply reading German communications anymore. They were predicting German tactical decisions with such accuracy that escort groups could position themselves for ambushes before German submarines even reached their assigned patrol areas. The psychological impact on German crews who found enemies waiting in locations that should have been secret was devastating to morale and operational effectiveness. But perhaps the most revolutionary development was the emergence of dedicated hunter-killer groups that operated independently of convoy protection duties. These specialized task forces, built around escort carriers and experienced destroyer crews, roamed the Atlantic, seeking German submarines with the single-minded purpose of destruction. They represented the complete reversal of roles that had characterized the early war period. Commander Daniel Gallery's Task Group 22.3, centered on the escort carrier USS Guadalcanal, exemplified this new approach to anti-submarine warfare. Gallery's group had developed tactics that combined carrier-based aircraft with surface ship coordination to create killing zones that German submarines could not escape. Their success rate was unprecedented in naval warfare, with confirmed kills occurring on over 60% of submarine contacts. The German response to these hunter-killer groups revealed the complete breakdown of their submarine strategy. Admiral Dönitz ordered increasingly desperate tactical modifications that only accelerated German losses. U-boat commanders were instructed to attack escort carriers despite their heavy defensive screen, to maintain radio silence even when coordination was essential, and to press home attacks against convoys that possessed overwhelming protective advantages. The results were predictably catastrophic. Captain Reinhard Scheuren, one of Germany's most successful submarine aces with over 20 confirmed kills, encountered Gallery's task group in November 1943. His U-564 was detected by aircraft while attempting to attack a convoy and found itself facing coordinated attacks from multiple directions. Scheuren's post-war account captured the helplessness of experienced German crews facing these new tactics. The Americans had aircraft maintaining contact destro, while he is approached from 3 bearings. Every evasive maneuver was anticipated. Every attempt to escape was countered. We were not engaging in combat, but being systematically executed. The industrial capacity that supported this transformation dwarfed anything Germany could match. American shipyards were launching escort carriers faster than German submarines could be built. British electronics factories were producing radar sets with capabilities that exceeded German comprehension. Most significantly, the training programs that created competent anti-submarine warfare crews were graduating thousands of skilled operators monthly, while German submarine schools struggled to replace their mounting losses. The transformation was complete and irreversible. By winter 1943, the German U-boat force that had once terrorized the Atlantic had been systematically dismantled by opponents who had evolved from helpless victims into efficient predators. The wolf packs that had brought Britain to the brink of starvation were being destroyed faster than Admiral Dunitz could train replacement crews. The hunters had become the hunted, and the mathematics of survival now favoured those who had once sailed in terror across the grey waters of the North Atlantic. American ingenuity, British determination, and Allied coordination had rewritten the rules of naval warfare forever.